Shana Tova. How's everybody feeling this evening? Are our hearts a little more open? Are we feeling a little more grounded? Do things feel a little sweeter? Maybe the grief is a little more on the surface? Okay, so perhaps we're heading in the right direction. My name is Rabbi Zelig Golden, and I ask you for your permission to share some words.
Please.
I'm standing on this ground that is called Camp Newman in the Valley Mark West Springs, in between the cities of Santa Rosa and Calistoga, on the land, the historic land of the Onatsatis. I go by the pronouns he and him. I have substantial white privilege, and I'm an Ashkenazi Jew by birth, and I practice in that way with an open heart to all sorts of ways, Jewish and non-Jewish. I'm also one of the founders of Wilderness Torah, now working to help create this organization, this movement for 14 years. I've been the executive director for 2 years, and I hold a vision, a piece of which I care to share tonight, with your permission. So right here 4 years ago, the Tubbs fire roared through this valley, devastating this campus, burning nearly every building and a tremendous amount of the forest. Camp Newman was part of what we now understand to be a climate change catastrophe, in what feels like an endless string of these catastrophes today. Do you know what I'm talking about? Well, a few weeks after the fire settled down, Ruben Arkelevich, the former executive director of this camp, he and I took the first walk beyond the main campus, which is about 50 acres, and up into that forest. This land is about 500 acres. We walked through an endless scene of black silhouettes on the blue sky. Gray, crunchy mineral soil beneath our feet, like a fresh winter snow. And as we walked, we felt like we were walking in a foreign moonscape, and tears dripped down Ruben's face. And I tenderly share this story because the pain from that catastrophe 4 years ago still lingers in the hearts of the people who love this place and tend this place. And I'm wondering, is Marty in the tent or near the tent? No, that's okay. Well, Marty is the retreat director, and you might meet her around supporting us. And Marty and the team of Newman have done an amazing job, like a phoenix from the ashes, rebuilding this place. This place is virtually brand new. And we, Wilderness Torah, are the first retreat to be here since the rebuilding. So I want to offer a lot of kavod to Newman and the staff. And I also tell the story because Wilderness Torah is now entering into a partnership with Newman. Newman does not want to go it alone. They want to create partnerships. And Wilderness Torah has long held a vision for creating the Center for Earth-Based Judaism. It's one of our founding visions. And we are beginning the process here at Newman on this land. So as we enter into the Shemitah year, which we just crossed into, we are beginning a year-long community design charrette process. And starting over a year from now, we aim to start building. So join us on the journey of collectively dreaming into what that might be. And I also share the story because it's instructive for our times. Annual fires are becoming the norm here in California, the West Coast, and all over the world. The Amazon, Australia, BC, it's happening all over the world. And we're in a historic drought. Last week I went home to Spokane, Washington to visit my ailing father. And to get home, I flew through Las Vegas. Oi. And as I neared Vegas, I saw the Hoover Dam. And from 30,000 feet, it's enormous. But I was taken aback not by the dam, but by Lake Mead and how shallow the lake is. This massive, wide, white ribbon along the entire surface of the lake, foretelling water shortages that are of historic proportions and foreshadowing the end of major cities and massive climate change migration. And then on the way home to Oakland, I flew over Yosemite and I saw the Caldor fire, the plume of smoke rising above Lake Tahoe. And in that moment, tears went down my cheeks. Oy. In the words of Reb Zalman, it's time to make a kresk. Oy. Can you say oy with me? Oy. It is a time to grieve, my friends. The earth is crying. Some say the earth is dying. And so are we, along with it. This is the times that we are in. And yet, Rosh Hashanah calls us to celebrate. So tonight, on Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, we are called to celebrate, and I want to invoke the many names of Rosh Hashanah as instructions for how to do so. Yom HaZikaron. Rosh Hashanah is the day of remembering, and the sages teach that today God remembers us, to imbue us with the will to fulfill our sacred duty and participate in the renewing of the world. And I read it the other way around. Today we must remember and recommit to our sacred role as tenders of this planet. Who's with me on that? Sweet. Today's called Yom Teruah, the day of sounding. Literally, today's the day of sounding the shofar. And the sages instruct us to hear the shofar, the primal sound made by a kosher, spiral animal horn, intended to wake us up, pursue forgiveness, and set in motion our lives to fulfill the highest expression of our sacred human duties. And today is called Hayom Harat Olam, the birthday of creation. Today we celebrate the world with song, with dance, with reverence, and with feasting. Hayom Harat Olam, the birthday of the world, also has a deeper meaning. For Harat also means conception, like pregnancy. Olam, world, also means eternity. And so Rosh Hashanah more deeply is eternal conception, an access point in time, a medicine into infinite possibilities. So this name for Rosh Hashanah, Hayom Harat Olam, was first adopted by an unknown 9th century poet and liturgist, based on a passage from Jeremiah, one of the darkest of our biblical prophets. And Jeremiah had the mission to warn our ancestors that they were going to suffer famine, conquest, and exile if they failed to observe their sacred duties, love God, care for the land, observe sacred time. Distraught by his mission, knowing the people would not return, he expresses a horrific fantasy that someone might kill him in his mother's womb, while killing his mother too. Asher lo motatani, merachem, vatihi li imi kivi, v'rachma harav, harat olam. May my mother be my grave, in her womb, pregnant for eternity. Harat olam, pregnant for eternity. Oy. So Rabbi Ethan Tucker teaches that Harat Olam, this is Jeremiah's image of eternal pregnancy, was about hopes forever unrealized, aspirations never fulfilled, and Jeremiah's grief that the people would never succeed in their obligations. But the 9th century poet transforms Harat Olam, eternal potential, unfulfilled potential, with the day Hayom, creating Hayom Harat Olam, the day of manifesting from eternal possibilities. So Rosh Hashanah's celebration of creation is a tikkun. It is a healing from Jeremiah's hopelessness. And we need that tikkun today. We need a healing from our own hopelessness. I need a healing from my own hopelessness. And Rosh Hashanah this year feels like a crossroads between Harat Olam and Hayom Harat Olam. Do you feel me on that? So my question is, will we realize the namesake of this day? Will we honor creation sufficiently and set in motion the healing that is needed in the face of climate catastrophe? Not to mention COVID and so many other things going on in the world today. Or will we go like Jeremiah, hopes unfulfilled, our earth temple destroyed because we failed our sacred duty? So this brings me to the final name of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. The Rosh Hashanah myth is that today God judges us, and Yom Kippur seals us in the book of life, God willing. And yet judgment for me is about how I reflect. To what degree am I fulfilling my sacred duty? Am I realizing my unique gifts? And the book of life is an opportunity for me to write myself into the book, metaphorically, by setting my intentions for how I want to focus my behavior, my actions, my conduct from the infinite possibilities. Yes, with God's partnership. That's why we uplift the vibration in ceremony and prayer. But we step forward in that judgment and in that sealing the book of life with divinity. Rabbi Norman Lamb, the grandfather of a dear friend Ari Lamb, Rabbi Ari Lamb, articulated this in his 1963 Rosh Hashanah service, as fresh as ever. He said, "Each of us possess wonderful native abilities and marvelous inner resources. Either we can opt for Jeremiah's Harat Olam, remaining forever with our greatest human treasures locked up within our hearts and never brought forward into fruition, or we can joyously proclaim Hayom Harat Olam, that today we shall express these capabilities into reality, fulfilling ourselves by giving birth to a new world." So in 2021, what is the new world we want? What is the new world we need? Or perhaps better asked, how do we want to show up in the world today? Consider that for a moment. How do you want to show up in the world today? Given the state of things, my best response is to focus on resilience. Becoming resilient people, resilient communities, and becoming human beings. Once again, you see, in my view, we are lost as human beings, away from our human nature because we have removed ourselves from right relationship with creation, and therefore ourselves. We must, in essence, return from exile. That's right, Ilana. We must, in essence, return from exile. Exile in the Jewish conception relates to the destruction of our ancient temple when the fire was snuffed out, being banished from our sacred lands. This is Jeremiah's prophecy. This is Jewish history. This is the core trauma of the Jewish people that we carry in our bones. This trauma also mirrors the similar story of countless land-based peoples the world over, including more recently, the indigenous peoples of the lands that we live on today and pray on right now. Humanity as a whole is in exile, and climate change is a global symptom of that exile. Return from exile, then, cannot be another exceptional Jewish journey. Rather, we must, in my view, take a universal approach. Our return from exile must be a return to sacred relationship with land, spirit, and people, where we are in solidarity with those whom we share land and resources, here and now. So as we endeavor to co-create the Center for Earth-Based Judaism here on this land at Newman, we are consciously cultivating relationships with the First Nations people of this land, the Onatsatis from right here in this valley, as well as Pomo and Coast Miwok from the broader Sonoma County and beyond. Let us see what unfolds. And we must do so, I believe, as a Jewish community rooted deeply in Jewish values. So tonight, when we lit the candles and entered into the year 5782, we began the Shemitah year, commonly translated as the sabbatical year. Shemitah literally means release. The Torah instructs us to leave the land fallow, remove debts, and make economic and agricultural adjustments to ensure a more equitable and just society. In essence, Shemitah is the ultimate Jewish resilience program. It's a critical code, I feel, for our return from exile. And the particular Jewish story of exile is rooted in the failure of our ancestors to fulfill the duties, with Shemitah in particular. The 2nd century sages, 130 years after the fall of the Second Temple, explained this in Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers. They said, exile comes upon the world because Shemitah is neglected. And Rashi, the mainline medieval commentator, explains, as a punishment for the sin of neglecting the laws of Shemitah, Israel becomes exiled. That's heavy. And I would say if our ancient sages have any credibility whatsoever with us, it seems like we should take Shemitah very seriously. Do you feel me on that? Shemitah is the essence of a Shabbat for the land. In Torah mythos, Moses receives the laws of Shemitah at the highest point on Mount Sinai. In Leviticus it says, God says to Moses, when you come into the land must be given a rest period, a Sabbath for God for 6 years. You may plant your field, prune your vineyards, harvest your crops, but the 7th year is a Sabbath of Sabbaths for the land. Do not plant your fields, do not prune your vineyards, do not harvest your crops. All the crops shall be eaten by both domestic and wild animals. So Shemitah is a time for rest, for the land to be in the domain of the wild, for us to be in the domain of the wild. If truly taken to heart, Shemitah is our central permaculture design principle. And I'm pointing at Yigal Deutscher in the back. As far as I'm concerned, he is my Rebbe on Shemitah. Some of the words I'm speaking today come from his Torah that he shared with me in a call 2 weeks ago. So thank you, Yigal. If you want to know about Shemitah, we will study with Yigal and others who hold this Torah. And if truly taken to heart, we must learn. And I want to name 3 core principles that I've learned. Number 1, to be in right relationship to the land, we must be in right relationship to the sacred. Because the land belongs to the sacred. Number 2, to tend land in a sacred way, we must learn to tend the wild. And ultimately remain partly wild ourselves. It's not just a law, it's an instruction on how to walk in the world. And third, to have continuous sustenance. Agriculture during the 6 years must be designed with the 7th year in mind. I fantasize permaculture forests, perennial food forests. Out there in the center of Camp Newman, we'll show you in a couple days where we intend to grow these ideas. Because in developing the Center for Earth-Based Judaism, we aspire to create a world-class Shemitah-based education center that centers and cultivates climate change resilience. And we want to do this in design with you, with a community design process where we harvest the dreams of us all to create something that our community has not yet seen. So please join us on this Shemitah design charrette journey. More on that. Shemitah principles can end our exile by returning us to right relationship with nature, each other, and ultimately ourselves. Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, and a revered modern mystic, teaches that because the destiny of land and people are intertwined, Shemitah has the power to utterly transform society by recovering balance, revealing the inner divine light within each one of us, and helping us all discover our deepest gifts. Rav Kook states a few things. I quote him, "What Shabbat does for the individual, Shemitah does for humanity. The soul of people and land are so intertwined. We work from a base of their being to bring into existence the intricate patterns of holiness that lie within during Shemitah. During Shemitah, the pure inner spirit can be revealed. And human beings during Shemitah will return to a state of natural health so that they will not need healing for sicknesses, which mostly befalls us when the balance of life is destroyed and our lives are distant from the rhythms of nature." Shemitah at its core brings us out of exile because it helps us return into rhythm with nature. Shemitah helps us regain our wildness, an essential ingredient to healthy people and a healthy world. This return from exile, my friends, will not happen all at once. I know we know that. And yet, it's a major culture change movement, and we cannot waste any more time from refraining to make the commitments to do this return work. And the first step, in my view, the first step of many, is to become fully human again by returning, at least in part, to our wild selves. We must commit to taking time out in nature every day. Our teacher, John Young, called it sit spot. Jewish tradition calls it hitbodedut, making yourself alone. And Rachel will teach us extensively about this tomorrow, so stay tuned. So I leave you with a final teaching, one of my favorites from Aleph Dalet Gordon, the 1910 essay, Logic from the Future, on the nature of tshuva, spiritual return. He says, when you return to nature, on that day your eyes will be open and you will gaze straight into the eyes of nature, and in the mirror you will see yourself. You will know that you have returned to yourself, because when you hid from nature, you hid from yourself. So this Rosh Hashanah, I ask you to explore what exile means to you and how you want to engage in return. This is a critical first step so we can collectively roll up our sleeves and take up our sacred duty to tend this wild, precious world.